the Living Life Juicy podcast. I'm your host, John Losey, and I'll be your guide through this experience. And this is a place where we explore how we can be present and kind as we do great things. So I interview interesting people that, regardless of their industry or their position or their role, I think have something to say to everybody who's interested in living juicy. So you can find the Living Life Juicy podcast on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms. We also have a blog. If you're more interested in video resources or resources that help individuals and organizations grow, I've got the Growing People podcast as a YouTube channel and blog as well. We do short videos, explainer videos that in 2 minutes can start a conversation without, like, I like to hear my voice, so I'll talk for 10 minutes when I could do it in 2. So explainer videos are a great way to get that done. You can also find more about our business in the Into Wisdom Group by going to intowisdomgroup.com. And that's where overall we try and guide individuals and groups to their next best step towards growth and sustainability. And we do that by designing experiences and resources to develop individual professionals and organizations. Last thing on my side is I've got a new book out called The Pottery Panda, The Art of Intentional Progress. And you can find out more about that at potterypanda.com. So today we are talking with Mike Brennan, who is, he's an author and creative consultant and communicator, and tells stories on pages and on stages, integrates creativity, innovation, and productivity. He leads the Daily Creative Habit community on Facebook and hosts his own podcast called Creative Chats, which he's been gracious enough to have me on. Mike is actually my first guest to make a return appearance on Living Life Juicy. I met Mike back in 2009 in a conference called The Thing, where he was doing amazing live event sketching. So any of my people who do events, contact Mike if you want to have some really great capturing of critical moments visually, and he'll put the words up there, and he's a very unique visual style. He has a new book out called Make Fun a Habit. It's coming out in the fall. It's available for pre-sale now. But before we get into that, I definitely want to hear more about that, the Make Fun a Habit book. But I want to hear more about Mike's origin story. So Mike, welcome back. Glad that you're here.
Thanks, John. Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Yeah. So just going back, I think we have a connection, and what Terry Weaver is doing with The Thing is, because it's community-based, and I've been community-based for a long, long time, but I love the fact that he is really coming alongside entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurs or solopreneurs can be a very lonely place. Mm-hmm. And having a community of people that are in your corner is so important. But want to hear from you. First of all, like when people ask you, hey, Mike, what do you do? How do you explain what you do to the uninitiated?
Yes. Yeah. It's been a bit of a challenge because I do so many different things, all within the sphere of creativity. But I have my hand in a lot of projects typically. And so the way that I've come around that is to say that I am a creator and communicator who tells stories on pages and stages.
That's a great phrase.
At least, yeah, well, it gives enough information, and then people can ask questions of like, okay, what exactly does that mean? What kind of creator? And so then I say, well, on the creator side, my background is visual art. I went to school for graphic design and worked in the field. I still do graphic design, logos, marketing materials, those kind of things. And it also, over time, came to be more illustration as well. Things that were of interest to me personally that I turned into products such as books, and just really followed my curiosity in terms of visual art. And I do that for clients as well in terms of illustration for projects, and then also, like you mentioned, live sketching at events, where I'm there basically storytelling what's happening during an event in real time. I'm creating these images. If there's someone who's on stage and there's a great quote, I'm capturing that quote as part of the art. And then it can be shared on social media in real time so that people can see what's happening. And if they're not there, they have a sense of FOMO, if they're missing out, or if they're there, they can be like, hey, that was an awesome takeaway. I'm glad that you captured that, because now there's something more than something I tried to scrawl in a notebook that I'll never look at again. There's actually a piece of art that I can be inspired by. So I do that for clients. And then on the communicator side, I talk about creativity, I talk about fun and play, and also about mental health, and specifically creativity and mental health, that crossroads. All these things have come out of my own journey and experiences. And I really try to be as open-handed with that as possible, because I've found that as I share these stories and experiences, more people come and say, you know what, I'm so glad that you're talking about this, because that's something that I'm dealing with or have dealt with, or I'm glad that you're shining a light on this, because there's some things that people don't usually talk about. And so that comes by, like you said, my podcast, Creative Chats. It comes from me public speaking at events, and then also doing some corporate trainings now, and some getting with organizations and teams and saying, like, how can we talk about creativity and productivity and play and fun, and really try to get people to show up as the best versions of themselves, so they're not simply just these, worker bees who are blindly following the plan, but they're actually engaged and curious and getting the best work that's fulfilling them personally as well as professionally, so that everybody wins.
Yeah, and what I appreciate, I mean, we first connected around your sketchings at the thing, and because I've experienced the sketchnoters and the people who are documenting more the content, and what I love that. I love that. In fact, I practice that in my note taking. But what you do is not convey information. You capture a moment and the emotions around that moment, and that's what makes it memorable. Information is great, but the emotional contact and impact that you capture, that's what's going to move people to action and move people forward. The other thing, we talked about that a little bit last time we talked. Also, we talked about the fact that acknowledging the need for emotional and mental support needs to be demystified, and it can't be a taboo anymore. Especially, I think it's true not only in the corporate world, but also in the ministry world, where the people who need the most support are the ones who are alienated because they're seen as broken, and they're not broken. They just need different sorts of support, and they need the encouragement to find somebody who's a trained listener is so crucial. But I also think that your approach of engaging your creative spirit is crucial as well, because that's some of that. You need the support around you, but you also need take steps yourself.
Absolutely.
Tell me a little bit more. This is what the superhero part of Mike Brennan's the superhero, so we got to know your origin story. So how did you get to where you're at right now?
Yeah, well, I feel like it's been a long, windy path. And the more people I talk to about their own origins and how they've arrived where they are today, I think that's more and more common. The misconception is that somehow it's supposed to be, just up and to the right, and always this advancing, never retreating, never having any missteps, never having moments where you're wandering in the desert for years, and that simply isn't true. And so to take that pressure off ourselves, the more that we talk about our complete stories, not just the highlights, I think we do a service to not only ourselves, but to other people around us. And so for me, my artistic journey started when I was a kid. I was drawing greeting cards for family members, and I realized I can make something and give it to somebody and see their face light up. They'd put it up on the fridge. They'd be like, "You made this for me? Like, you took time and attention and you created something just with me in mind." And I didn't know it at the time, right? Because when you're a kid, you're simply just doing what feels good. You're having fun. But later on, looking back, I realized, like, there's a transaction that's happening here. I'm creating something, I'm giving it to somebody else, and I'm impacting their life. And even if that impact is a smile for just a moment, there's still something powerful about that. And so I knew that I wanted to do more of that in whatever way that I could, and whatever way that looked like. And so as I continued on my journey with art, it started to have these conversations with my parents, where it's like, "Are you sure you want to be an artist? Don't you want to be a doctor, a lawyer, something that makes money?" And of course, I'm like, "No, I'm being stubborn, and this is what I really want to do." And so the happy medium was graphic design, because at least it was commercially viable. right? They knew that I could get a job at an advertising agency or some other design agency, and it was in the corporate sector, and there was at least, again, there was money behind it. It wasn't simply me just painting something and on a street corner trying to sell it, you know. So that ended up having me go on that course. But over time, I realized that there was so much more to my creativity than just design, and I ended up having to come back to my own art and re-examine it in light of even illustration and drawing, and confront a lot of lies that I believed when I was even in art school, comparing myself to the people around me, going, I'm not as good as they are. I'm not as talented naturally as they are. I can't do a photorealistic style. I mean, you know, when I draw things, it doesn't look like a photograph, right? That frustrates me. And I can certainly come close to some things, but it's not an enjoyable experience. And so I somehow told myself I wasn't a quote real artist. I could do design and I could maybe draw some cartoons every once in a while or something, but really to be a legitimate artist, that just wasn't in the cards for me. And so coming back to this place for me after, you know, honestly leaving art for a season of 10 years, suffering from depression, ending up having to come back to my art because I wanted to recapture that sense of joy when I was a kid and go like, is it possible for me to create something and just feel good about it and not worry about clients and committees and budgets and all the extra things that add pressure and stress to creating? Can I create something because it makes me feel good? And I didn't know the answer to that. But that's what set me out on what I call now my daily creative habit, which was I'm going to show up every day and create something. I'm going to draw something. And maybe it's digital, maybe it's in my sketchbook, maybe it's, you know, a 5-minute drawing in the beginning because it's all I could manage because I was dealing with depression. I needed to lean into it and see where this was going to go. And so that was my journey back to my creativity in terms of visual art, in terms of identifying some mile markers on this journey for me that I realized, oh, these aren't just for me. These are actually for all creative people, which, P.S., I think everyone's creative. And this is stuff that I think is applicable regardless of whatever it is that you're creating. For me, the context was visual art, but I realized quickly that this is much bigger than that. In the past, I've had seasons where I've been involved with music. I've had seasons where I've been involved in creating environments. I create a podcast. I create messages and talks. All this is coming from the same place of being a creator. And so realizing that my world and my expression of creativity had been in a certain context, but it was so much bigger than that in terms of talking about creativity and inviting other people into this place of discovery. You know, for me, first it was personally, and then it led to professionally. And so I think that there's really a lot of value in this discovery process that happens when you're engaged, following your curiosity, following your creativity, and again, not trying to simply think, well, this is a hobby, this is for me personally, what does this have to do with me professionally? Or this is only at work, this is only professionally, what does this have to do with me while I'm home? You know, we're not these segmented beings like that, like we like to pretend. There's crossover, and creativity doesn't have a clock. It comes and goes, and you have to be intentional about it. But the beautiful thing is something that you do personally can affect you professionally and vice versa. And so being a more holistic creative person, holistic person who is engaged with pursuing innovation, pursuing, even if creativity looks like nothing like it looks like for me, right? It's not visual art, it's not music, it's none of these, what I call the obvious expressions of art. Maybe it's more I can organize things really well and creatively, or I have a way with numbers that I can just really get in and balance the budget very quickly and, you know, creatively, not illegally, but creatively, right? There are different expressions of this creativity. And so I've evolved into, let's talk more broadly about creativity. And this has all come out of my origins of my context being visual art, but also me being a I'm a bigger person than just that expression as well. And so that has become part of my journey.
Yeah. As I've explored creativity as a concept, and our mutual friend Craig McNair Wilson, I found, I can't find it right now, but I went to a one-man show he did back in the 70s, and I've got a cassette tape of it. But I went to a lot of his workshops, and he really influenced my perspective around creativity. And all the research shows we don't learn creativity, we unlearn it. And with what you're talking about, I think it goes beyond just being creative. I think we are all artists with different palettes. So I've tried I did watercolors for a while. I've done lots of different things, but my true palette is programming. I view that as that's my canvas, and all my experience and my education, all that is the palette I draw from in order to create a work of art that builds an experience for people to learn, grow, and take their next best step. I love the encouragement that you are giving people, and that's saying you're not just creative, you are an artist. And when you view your passion or your career or whatever as an artist, it changes the way you approach it. I also appreciate the idea that both, like what you're saying, creativity and artistry don't have a timeline, but you need to practice the habits in order to get there, even when you don't feel it. And I agree with this controversial statement in some communities, which is inspiration is for amateurs. And I mean that in the neutral sense, is that when you're not getting paid for your craft, you can just wait. But if you want to get paid for whatever your art is, you've got to realize that you've got to show up and practice the things that'll become habits every day, even when you're not feeling it. And so I really appreciate the way that you have woven both of those factors in of, you've got to let it come as it comes, and you've got to wake up every day. And I love the phrase, one day at a time, because if you flip it around just a little bit, day by day or one day at a time is also new every morning. So all of a sudden it changes from limits to possibilities, in that, man, when I get up in the morning, whether it's about my business or about my friendships, relation, whatever it is, it's a new day. And I get a chance to start fresh every day. So it's not just day by day, it's new every morning. And I appreciate the whole concept of a daily creative habit.
Yeah, I mean, it's one that I stumbled upon, but one that has completely changed my life. And you're right, as far as inspiration's funny because so many people use it as an excuse. They're waiting for the muse to visit, right? They need inspiration to strike before they get to work. And I'm like, you know what? Inspiration needs to find you already working, already showing up, because waiting is only going to delay your action, and nothing's going to happen if you don't act. And so when you show up, when you carve out a specific time to show up, and when you get your materials, whatever it is that you need to actually create something ready, and you're there in the moment, if you're feeling like, I don't know what to do, just start doing something. Because it's, clarity follows action. It's not going to come usually and hit you all of a sudden, and then you're going to go off and then go, okay, now I'm going to create this. And that happens from time to time, certainly. But I think to wait upon that and use that as an excuse not to be working on something is a very dangerous place to be. And certainly we won't get through a lot of bad work that we need to get through before we can get to the good work. And so for me, I realized it was more about establishing the habit than it was the quality of the work early on. The quality of work will come because the quantity is increasing and the frequency is increasing. And so realizing this is a long haul journey, not simply just the product of whatever it is that I'm producing right now in this moment.
Yeah. And like for me, there are times when something pops in my head and I can't wait to get the computer to start writing. Most of the time, it's usually a page or 45 minutes of just kind of being awkward and writing crap. And then, like what you said, the muse catches up to your action. And all of a sudden, like I've deleted everything and started over 4 times. And now I really feel like I'm in a groove. And if you don't create the space, like I can't produce anything. If I sit down and give myself a 45-minute window, usually it's right when that window closes that something's starting to happen. So for that kind of work, it's called deep work. And that takes a significant amount of time. And so chunking out your day, and I know that there's some people who go back to back to back meetings, but there's some things that you can set up your calendar so that it automatically gives you a 10-15 minute buffer between things. I heard one person talking about when you go back to back to back, by the time you get to your third meeting, you can't even recall what happened in the first two. But if you create transition space margins, all of a sudden your brain can solidify what just happened and get you ready for what's next. And I think that the whole concept, well, that gets into the whole thing about margins, writing books, what I want to get to yours in just a minute. But when I was laying out my book, the importance of how I read, because I got to take notes in the margin. And if the page runs all the way, if your words run all the way to the edge of the page, there's no room for anybody else's thoughts. And so in doing the layout, to me, I made extra margins in mine and encourage people, this is your book, write in it, ask questions, get pissed at me, but interact with it. And if you don't have margins, you can't do that. It's true in your day. If you don't build margins into your day, there's no room for deviation if something doesn't go right. And we know, especially in with technology, something always goes wrong. There's always an upload or things like that. But if you don't build in those margins, there's no way you can be present enough to respond. It's always just what's out there. And if you don't control your schedule, somebody else will. So I want to hear more. Your book is all about the habits of fun. So let's start with the concept of habits, and then I want to get into the concept of fun. But why was it so important that it made it into the title of your book?
Because it's something that I realized gives me form and structure. It's funny because as a creative person, I'm kind of a strange bird in that I'm kind of split between the, creative dreamer, what you would consider like the flighty, storm of creativity, right? The nutty professor, right? Some creative people are all that. I'm like some of that, but then I'm also very practical. I also grew up in systems and structures that gave me some semblance of order. And so, but I'm not completely that way either, right? I'm not like, hey, let's just go completely by the book. And I despise when somebody makes me jump through a lot of hoops just because that's the way we've always done things. And that's the system that somebody set up somewhere and it makes no sense to me. So I'm this split person of practicality, but also creativity, productivity and creativity and innovation. These things, marrying them together. And I'm like, it needs some kind of form, right? I realize that creativity needs a container, if you will. If you think about it in terms of even a Tupperware container, right? That's giving you a space. What you do within that, you can do whatever you want, but it at least gives you a place for it to be organized and contained. And so a habit simply became something, and this was by accident again. I was simply showing up going, can I recapture something that I once had? That's my goal. My goal is mental health right now in the beginning. So I wasn't thinking, well, I need to build a new habit. I need to, nobody really thinks about that stuff, I don't think. It's more the result of what the habit may bring that is the enticing thing. And so for me, it was, well, what is going to allow me to be able to get into a regular rhythm of creating that can potentially bring me joy and help me feel satisfied, help me feel like I'm doing work that matters, that feels significant first to me and to other people as well. And I realized that what needs to happen there is consistency. And so it was consistency. It was showing up every single day at a specific time in a specific way, putting in the time, doing the work that gave me momentum. And momentum started to establish the habit, and habit brings change. So this chain reaction started to happen by accident at first. And then I started to acknowledge it and realize what was happening. And then I said, oh, okay, so this is actually tapping into a principle and something that's at work in other areas of life. Like if we go to the gym, we can start to lose weight, we can start to tone muscle. It's this habit of taking care of our bodies. If we're saving money, we're putting money in the bank, we're investing wisely, we can see that our money will grow. And it's this habit of being wise with our spending and saving and investing. So why would it be any different with creativity? Why would it be any different with play or fun, even for that matter? So I started to think about these things, and again, it was by accident, and it was just following the next breadcrumb on my trail. And so first for creativity, for me doing visual art, and more recently, it's turned to fun because I realized, there's so much stuff that we do that is, especially as an entrepreneur, you're always striving. You're always feeding your ambition and looking for that achievement and that next level and that breakthrough and building that thing because it doesn't look like what you want it to look like yet. There's always this vision forward, right? The next over the now. And if we're not careful, we can find ourselves in this trap of always looking forward, never celebrating where we are, never celebrating what we've actually just accomplished because we're moving on to the next thing already. And I've seen that in visual art, but I've also seen that in the other things that I've created in my life. And just the sense of me wanting to create the life I want. I started to fall into this trap of not celebrating, of not having things be as fun because there's always this striving, there's always this pushing and this ambition that if unchecked, it can really rob you of fun and joy and play, which then in turn affects your creativity and your experience. And so for the fun habit, it was, okay, there are things that we need to do that no one wants to do. Nobody enjoys, right? Nobody enjoys doing their taxes, unless you're an accountant, maybe, right? Nobody enjoys sitting through a long meeting. Nobody enjoys like all these different various parts that we have. We all have parts of our work or our life that we just don't enjoy. It's not a great experience. But I started to realize, like, what if we started to approach it with a different mindset? Like, how could we inject fun into something? Or start with a question of, what if this was fun? What would this look like? Like, I know it's not right now, but like, let's remove ourselves from that and from the negative thinking and the complaining and all those things that are so easy to attach to in the moment, and step back and start to change our mindset and go.
So it's funny, the phrasing that you use. Actually, you talk about being practical and creative. That's actually a workshop and a simple book that I have called Practical Creativity, and is formed around the 5 habits of highly creative people and 5 habits of highly practical people. And the idea being that not all of us are in a position where I can be totally creative, but I can rely on somebody else to be practical, or the opposite. And it's under the assumption that we are all artists and we all have the capacity to be practical. And let's find out how we develop those things. So I thought that was interesting that, I mean, your phraseology, and it sounds like you are the living embodiment of the workshop that I do. I'm going to do a free lunch and learn one in October that just introduces the concept of these things. But I'm curious about, because you mentioned it, there are people who actually enjoy spreadsheets. There are people who actually think it's fun to go through people's taxes. There's people who enjoy long meetings. I don't understand them, but they're there. So when you ask the question of how we can make this fun, and knowing that different things are fun for different people, how do you make sure that if it's fun for some, it's not excruciating for others? How do you account for the differences in what people see as fun?
Yeah, well, I think the first place is you need to be a student of yourself, right? Because if you don't understand yourself, you don't understand what constitutes as fun, then you're going to flounder around. You're not going to be able to be strategic in any matter. But when you recognize, okay, this is what my definition of fun looks like. This is what I consider to be fun. Then you can start to build those things in for yourself, taking responsibility for not necessarily everyone around you, but for yourself. Like, I'm in a meeting, I'm not the one who's controlling the meeting, but I'm present. I'm responsible for myself in that moment. Now, I have a few things I can do. I can check out. I could look for places to make things fun, appropriately. I don't want to be disruptive. I could look for, what do I have to contribute here that could be valuable, that could then make it fun for me? Because most of the times when we're in those boring meetings and things, it's because we feel like we've been told to show up. We maybe feel like we don't really need to be there. Perhaps the meeting isn't really run very well. Maybe there's room in there for us to aid that. And if we can figure out how to fix that for ourselves first, then you can maybe unlock that into, what is the value I can bring to people around me right now too. In terms of making it fun for other people, I think once you figured out your own definition of fun, it is realizing that people are wired differently. For somebody who, fun is, hey, let's go crazy with a can of silly string and just be like zany. There are other people on the spectrum who are like, that sounds absolutely horrible and juvenile, and I would never take part in that, or go anywhere near that. And so how do you navigate those two people in the same room? Well, I think when you start to contextualize it, when you start to make room for the differences, and then you start to assign roles for things. If you have group activities, or you're in a workshop where you need someone to be the rule keepers, right? Otherwise there's no sense of order. If you're doing an activity where there's a winner and a loser, so to speak, you won't know how to measure that if the rule keepers aren't there. And so you find the people who rule keeping is fun for them. There are other people who are like, I don't want anything to do with rule keeping. I just want to be on the field. I want to be like in the zone, having fun, like, the music loud or whatever. Like, let them do what they do best, but do it with intention. And when those roles are defined well enough and everyone knows what to expect and they know how to own their own fun and they see their place in the bigger picture, I think that's when everybody starts to win. And so it's a lot harder to do that, because you have to be intentional about that. And I think most people, with meetings and things, it's another thing that we just need to get through and get on to the next. And so to invest that amount of intention on something, sometimes it just feels overwhelming for people, or they just simply aren't even having those thoughts of, yeah, there are different types of people in this room right now. How do I speak to the various different people? They're thinking, how do I speak to myself? Because that's my bias.
And I think you brought up something really important. And I think there's two roles. One, if you have influence and control of whatever situation you're in, versus if you're entering in, and how can you enter in fully? And I might think of it as, instead of creating fun, you're finding the fun, because that means you're not disrupting it and hijacking it. And I think that's crucial, to have the mindset of not having fun as a victim mentality. It's meaning that somebody else has control of your attitude. And so I think this has a lot to do with the Great Resignation, which was really a great reshuffle, because during the pandemic, people began to realize that, man, my workplace isn't ideal. And there's some places that were horrible workplaces, but there's other times people left because they wanted to find a company that would take care of them. And as all my friends at Farmers Insurance, who this week, as of our recording, 11% of their workforce was laid off. And so while people who worked for that company for 20 years didn't get the loyalty they gave, and the people were leaving during the pandemic because they had the expectation that their company was supposed to take care of them. And companies had the expectation that they could create productivity in their people, when really it's about internal locus of control. If I want to have fun, nobody can stop me from finding the fun that's out there without hijacking wherever I'm in. The other side of that is, like, I love what you said about knowing your room and knowing your people, and find out who are the rule keepers, who are the zany ones, and all that. And if that means that you say, I bring a can of silly string and you are my silly string person and you are the silly string timer. When I say silly string, you have 30 seconds to stray silly string and you keep them under control. And now it's like everybody feels they have the role, you know them. And one of the things I come from like experiential facilitation. So all the trust falls and all that kind of stuff. And what I found, those are really great when you have a longer experience and you can contextualize them. But when I'm working with executives, when I'm working with a leadership team, more important than anything else, if you want to build trust, you need to know each other's stories. And that lets you see into through their eyes. Now, what I've discovered is a lot of people, we gotta, build a relationship. We have to like each other. You don't even have to like each other if you want to do great things. You just have to know each other's story and agree on what success looks like. What you'll find is you'll build relationships and build friendships through the process of working forward. But if I know your story and I trust that you're trying to get the same things done I am, then all of a sudden it becomes a curiosity of why you're doing what you're doing, not a question of bad intentions. So that person who is, I'm a rule follower. If you ask me to yell or do silly string or whatever, I'm never going to do it. But all of a sudden, when that person resists, it's not that they're trying to put a roadblock in. What it is now I know kind of what their preference is. I know we're all shooting for the same goal. So I now ask, that choice, help me understand why that choice is going to take us further. Now we can have really healthy process conflict. Adam Grant talks about two different types of conflict: relationship conflict and process conflict. And relationship conflict just torpedoes group process because you're worried about you don't trust the intentions. Now, process conflict is what catapults groups forward, because now every conflict is about refining the process and getting better and better and better. And so I'm a believer not in conflict resolution, but conflict management, making sure that we're using the energy that comes from these differences. And again, my habit around productivity and meeting may be different than yours, but together, if we're questioning each other's processes, and I trust your intentions, man, that's a powerful step. And I like the idea of when you talk about the consistency of habits and the inconsistency of fun. It's a great kind of tension to be living in. So tell me more about, don't give away your book, but tell me some of the thoughts around what's in the book. Tease us, make us a little bit hungry. Give us a little bit so we want more.
So this book wasn't actually even a thing until a couple of months ago. It was, it was and it wasn't. It was thoughts, and it came out in small ways. But I wasn't thinking like, hey, I'm going to sit down and write this book, until actually I sat down with our mutual friend Terry Weaver, as you mentioned before, and it was through this conversation he's just like, look, let's just outline this thing. Stop giving yourself excuses as to why you can't do this and why now isn't the right time and all these other things. And he's like, we're around his kitchen table, and he's like, okay, let's do 30 chapters, a chapter a day that you can do, that are small chapters filled with stories, personal experiences, observations, followed by a series of questions, prompts, and activities, so that people have a way to implement whatever the chapter discusses. And so developing that framework helped me then go, I can certainly do this. And I actually did. In 30 days, I wrote a chapter a day, and was amazed at how I actually was able to achieve this. I had taken things that I had learned from my visual art journey and showing up every day, and now it was recontextualized to written word. And certainly that was more of a challenge in some respects, because I didn't have as much history to rely on in terms of some wins and things. But it was again the same process. It was just recontextualized. So once I actually did that, and then realized, oh, I'm giving people a resource here. This is, the tagline of this is a creative playbook for making life and work fun again. And that's really what I hope it is that it's a playbook. And there's the pun on words there, on purpose, because I want it to be a resource for someone who they can look at it and they can dive into whatever chapter they want in whatever order. Or if they're a person that's more orderly and feels like they have to start at the front and go all the way to the back, they can do that as a traditional book as well. It's designed for you to bring yourself to the book and then engage with the material and then walk away from the book and then apply. So the book is a resource, it's an aid, it's a help in getting you thinking and identifying certain things that at certain points, some things may speak to you more than others. And there's simple things in this book. They're things that anyone can do. And, here's a, for instance, one of the chapters, I talk about doodling. And people can say to me, well, it's easy for you to talk about drawing and doodling because that's your background. You've been doing it since you were a kid. You just told us your whole story. You went to art school, But that's where doodling and drawing and art actually become a liability for me, because people can very easily say, well, that's your story, that's not mine. Therefore, I have an out. But what I really challenge people in this moment, in this chapter, I say, look, we've all had those moments when we're on the phone, or we're in a meeting, and our mind starts to wander a little bit, and then our pen starts to wander, and we're doodling. And we're just making marks on a page, we're drawing weird characters or, patterns and who knows what. But what if we started to use that on purpose? Because there was actually science there that said when you're engaging that part of your brain, you're actually helping remember some things. And so instead of just zoning out, falling asleep, or having your mind completely check out, you're letting your pen wander on a page and you're doodling, and you're maybe making some notes in the midst of that, but you're doing it in a way that is much more memorable. And you're not doing it for the sake of art. You're not doing this so that you can hang this on a frame and then put it on your wall or sell it, to a museum, right? That's not the point here. The point is to engage with this activity of doodling. Anybody can do it anywhere. You can even do it on a napkin. It doesn't need to be a piece of paper. It can be an envelope of a bill. It can be a scrap of paper someplace. And so let's bring it down to the lowest place that we can, so we take pressure off of it. Because everybody always says, well, I can't draw. I can't even draw a stick figure. I'm like, great. I'm not asking you to draw a stick figure. I'm just asking you to simply just doodle whatever comes. And so giving some people some stories around that, giving some people some questions to ask themselves and some activities to engage with it, so that the next time they're in a meeting, the next time they're on a phone call, they're on hold, whatever it is, they can start to practice this on purpose.
So
another example would
go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just going to ask the question because I was going to get into another chapter, but go ahead.
I was just wondering, couple of things. One, have you ever heard of oblique strategies? Brian Eno's deck of cards, which are like the creative whack in the head. Basically, it's you pull a card if you get into a block situation or you want to kick off. You get these cards, and like it might say something like remove specifics and convert to ambiguities. There's a challenge. Think of the radio. Don't be frightened of cliches. And so it's just these little cards that you can toss out in the middle. And he did it with music production and writing and things like that. And so as you're talking about this stuff, it sounds like what you're building might be the next phase of these oblique strategies. And just saying, hey, I mean, a follow-up product, and I'll reserve my 10% of royalties, but just kidding. But the idea of you take these 30 as a start and you build out, like everybody's got cards these days. I've got cards. And these are all for, this is interaction stuff. But for you, these creative habits, where as an individual, you can have a stack of the cards on your table and you just pull a card when you want to get a jolt. The other idea would be to use them in meetings. So you're talking about injecting and finding fun in the meetings, all of a sudden everybody realizes there's something stale here. Hey, let's go to the fun habits cards, or just have the book in there. So that, to my first thought was, man, the Blink Strategies is just a fun thing. And it's all based on cards. And I had an app that was a creative whack in the head that I would hit and it would kind of spin. So I see the follow-up products, which are already built. You just have to have a platform for them, the cards and an app for people to do that. And all of a sudden you've done all the creative work. You could add some, but 30 is more than enough to start. And give me your next, what other chapter? I'd love to hear that, because I think this has, for my work, when I'm working in like consulting and doing strategic processes and things like that, it's great to have a resource where you can just say, boom, let's move forward. Check out Mike's book. We're going to go on chapter 15 this time. And
yeah,
it's a great way to start it, with fun and creativity as a motivator.
Yes. Yeah. And, I use creativity, curiosity, fun, play, all these things almost interchangeably in the book, because I think it all comes from the same place. And certainly when you follow your curiosity, it leads to a place of experimentation, which then can lead to, play, right? And then can unlock tremendous amounts of creativity and possibility. And so to get us to a place where we're not so tense, where we're not so stuck in a rut or a mode, we need pattern interrupters a lot of times. And so I'm hoping that these chapters and these experiences I want people to go through will be just that. So they're not all things that have to do with visual art or music or things like that. There are certainly those sprinkled in, but there are other things like take the long way home. And that chapter is about simply, I share a story that I had lived in this certain place for a really long time, and you have your go-to route that you take from one place to another, and you typically don't deviate. You know where you're going, you know what's there, and you don't have to think about it anymore. And some of that is great in terms of being efficient and getting from point A to point B, but I found that there were some things around me right where I live that I had no idea that were there. And one day it was because of a detour, or because simply getting lost on something, or saying, what happens if I take the long way home today? That I found and discovered some things that were there all along, but I had no idea that they were there. And I was amazed, because I was like, why didn't anybody ever tell me about these things? And for them, it was like, oh, it's no big deal. It's just, you didn't know that?
That's my
path. Like, no, I didn't. Right, yeah, exactly. And so taking a different path, taking the long way home, introduced some new experiences for me, which then unlocked a bunch of things for me that went, well, how many other things are right around me that I have no idea about? And it sparked a curiosity for me to set out and be intentional about doing that every so often. Now, of course, you can't do that if you have an appointment and you're stressed, or you have a time crunch for something. But to allow yourself, again, going back to margins, right? Some margin in your space and time for you to take the long way home, to discover and uncover and go, I've passed this street all the time, but I don't really know where that goes. What if today's the day when I take that road and find out where it goes? Maybe it goes a dead end. Maybe it goes nowhere. Maybe, I don't know.
And give yourself permission. You got to give yourself permission that that's not wasted time. Put that into your training and development bucket and say, you know what? I may be lost. I love the line from Mountain Men, an old movie. And these greenhorns run into an old mountain man, and they're worried, hey, have you ever been lost? And he says, never been lost, mighty confused for a few years, but never lost. And the idea of first of all, giving yourself permission for deviation, it's not wasted time, it's learning. And the other, the value that you find. In fact, what you describe is an exercise that I do when I'm leading groups in the practical creativity process for divergent thinking. And it comes out of De Bono's work, lateral thinking, but it's exactly, I say, imagine you're You get up in the morning and a helicopter takes you to the other side of town. You've got to drive into work. What do you see that's different? And we'll do that with a concept. Like, imagine this, you're brainstorming about employee engagement, and now you're trying to solve employee engagement on the snowboarding planet. All they do is snowboarding. It's the Great Hills, all that kind of stuff. You've got to solve engagement on the snowboarding planet. What are you going to do? And all of a sudden, they're in a brand new context. And the brain science, I mean, there's huge brain science around that with neural pathways. And we groove neural pathways. So when we have a problem statement or an issue statement, we always take the same path to solutions. And if you can start from a different place, your brain will take you to the same end, but you'll see new things. So the very first thing that I encourage people to do, whether it's groups or individuals, when you're making a plan, define success first. Because if you define it by your issue or by your problem, you're going to take the same paths to get there. But if you picture what success looks like first, it's going to open up new neural pathways where you're going to find new and different ways to get there.
Yeah, yeah. I also, I like to encourage people to contextualize this stuff too, because someone may read that chapter and be like, well, I live in such a small town. Whatever the excuse that rises to the top, and they automatically say, I want to skip this chapter. And I say, okay, well, what if you're in your work environment? You contextualize it to, you always have a certain path that when you enter your office, you go a certain floor or a certain way, grab your coffee, do your thing, whatever. Right? We all have our routines in that way. What if you just got in the elevator and got off the random floor and just did a lap around that floor of your office, your company? Don't go to somebody else's, right? Don't just be a stranger wandering in the middle of nowhere. But, maybe you discover that there's someone who works there that you didn't even realize works there. Or maybe somebody has something in their office that you see that all of a sudden sparks an idea for you, because you're like, oh my goodness, that totally can transfer to a project I'm working on right now, because it just gave me this idea. Because it was off the beaten path. You intentionally went out of your way to take the long way home, right? Or take the long way to your office, even inside of your office building or whatever. There are a million ways that you can textualize this, and that's where creativity comes in, and following your curiosity.
Yeah, it's like when you were talking, what came to me was find a door you've never opened before, and then knock before you open it. But so it's that idea of allowing yourself space and margin to see new things, and that's, to me, the beginner's mentality. Experts look for things that they're expert in, that they've already know or they see before. Beginners know they don't know it all, so they look for things they don't know. So I think that what you're talking about in your book is going to be the path towards a beginner's mentality or a growth mindset, of this idea of, man, here's 30 ways that you can expand your attitude to include fun. So I mean, I love where that's going. I can't wait to see it. But we could explore this. Like, we've already done this twice, so I know we could keep going, but I want to do some quick lightning round questions, and then hopefully leave people wanting more, rather than okay, done with these guys. But first, not including your own books, what's your favorite book or media to give away? What was the last book you gave away other than your own?
I think it was Creative Calling by Chase Jarvis. And he is another great creative thinker, a guy who, photography background, entrepreneur, and just is aligned with a lot of the things that we've been talking about and that we always talk about, in terms of your engaging with your creativity and taking ownership of your own journey and some of the process behind that as well.
Okay. Tell me a little bit, who are your heroes? Give me maybe one or two people who you see as a hero or a role model or somebody to emulate.
Ooh, that's a tough one.
Again, you're not signing your life away that you have to commit to this for the rest of your life or like that.
Yeah.
Feel free to change your mind even in the next 10 minutes.
Yeah. Um, it's funny. I don't know that I have like one person that I look to. I typically have pieces and parts of some people's journeys and things that resonate. And certainly um, there's the visual art component, right? The creativity component that I borrow from, but then there's also the entrepreneurial side of things. And so I don't know that there's any one person that has an embodied like, oh, this is the person I look to that I want to emulate their journey or their path or whatever. And it is certainly fluid. But one of the people that comes to mind just now in this moment, Julia Cameron, who wrote The Artist's Way, a great resource and book that talks a lot about morning pages, getting up and writing just 3 pages of just whatever in the morning, just to get your brain engaged, taking yourself on an artist date, creator's date, if you will. If you're not comfortable with calling yourself an artist, basically just saying, what are the things that are going to feed me? If going to a museum is the thing that's really going to fill my tank, then do that. Make that a priority and set a date for yourself to do that. If it's going to the park, if it's going to a movie, reading a certain book, it's in a cafe, or whatever it looks like, do that. And so I think a lot of her words certainly hang around me.
Yeah. So you just inspired me to reframe that question, because a lot of people have a hard time pinning down a singular person as a hero, and they don't even like the term. So what I think in the future, and you can take credit for this, or deny it's ever you, if you were to assemble a hero, whose parts would you use and why? Because I talked to a guy the other day. He says, I don't have any heroes. I don't believe in heroes, but here are the people and why. And I go on, and then you saying the same thing of, man, there's so many people that I pull different parts from. And I think we're in a different world now where there are no real heroes, because with so much exposure, our heroes, you also get their weaknesses every time. And so it's really hard to pinpoint somebody who I would totally want to emulate, even if they're great. So last lightning question. Who do you find yourself quoting most often? It could be an author, a movie, a book, or a leader. Can be deep and profound, or it could be from Fletch. So, and I'm dating myself by mentioning Fletch. What's your give me a quote or something that you refer to often?
Of course, now in this moment, I'm drawing a blank, but I certainly quote 80s movies a lot. Not necessarily, there's not like it's always this movie, but a lot of the comedies from the 80s or just classic movies. I think because it reminds me of a time that was just special and connects me with people. Like, I would get together with friends and we would quote these things back and forth to each other. I think it started honestly with Looney Tunes, because there would be voices and characters and things, Puma, whatever, like when he bangs him on the head, how many lumps do you want? Oh, 3 or 4,
Oh, 3 or 4.
Coffee. Yeah. Coffee, because tea gives me a headache, quotes like that are just, silly. But again, I think because it's wrapped in a time that was more innocent and fun, and we laughed, and it was memorable.
Yeah. Exit stage left.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm with you on those, man. Those are fun. And speaking of exit stage left, want to wrap things up here, and I want to encourage everybody out there, pre-order the book. This is going to be one of those resources, regardless of what industry you're in. It's going to be these resources to keep on your desk during a meeting, during a Zoom, during whatever, to inject fun habitually into whatever you're doing. So I think, let's see, Mike, where can you pre-order the book?
Yeah, so I've set up really easily to just go to makefunahabit.com, and that will forward right now to the pre-order for the book. And you can get that from my website. And there'll be more information coming on that as far as there is a paperback version and then also a hardcover version that you'll be able to get, and a fun box that I'm putting together that's limited. And that fun box will be a copy of the book, a copy of my other book, which is Daily Creative Habit Journal, which is basically a system that helps you show up every day for 90 days and set intention about what you're creating. And a lot of other fun surprises that some of them are to be determined, but things that will be just fun to interact with, fun to use in meetings, and just a box of surprise and delight.
Yeah, and check out his Facebook group. What is Daily Creative Habit group?
Yep, Daily Creative Habit.
He gives little bits of inspiration, and there's other creatives and non-creatives who post in there as well about their journey. So be sure to like and subscribe and do all the things you're supposed to do for this podcast, regardless of what platform you're on. Comment, share, do all that fun stuff, spread the word out there, because this is good stuff, regardless what profession you're in. And Mike, thank you so much for joining me again, because I feel this was new and fresh. Go back and listen. If you guys are here, go back a couple of years to my first conversation with Mike and learn more about his event sketching and more about both of our passion for storytelling. And now that you've listened to this, go back there. So Mike, thanks again. Thanks for giving the time. And I look forward to more conversations.
Thank you, John. Me too.